No, it's gonna be less. I don't know. That's why it's not gonna. No, but there's 200 acres. Oh, perfect. I was like, at first I was like trying to be like, well, yeah, the same. I was trying to like.
Yeah.
I like.
Yeah, I didn't like that. No, I didn't see.
I call the regular meeting of Mount Pleasant City Commission to order on Monday, September 25th, 2023 at 7 p.m. Please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Mount Pleasant City Commission recognizes the Anishinaabe, whose ancestral lands the city stands upon today. We acknowledge the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe and recognize that the three bands of Ojibwe, Saginaw, Black River, and Swan Creek, have resided on this land for over 200 years. Our acknowledgement of the full history of the tribe and our commitment to be good stewards of these ancestral lands are an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those ancestors who came before us. We give thanks to the generous care with which the Anishinaabe and those members of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan have given and continue to give to this land and our community. Clerk, please take the roll.
Commissioner Asman?
Here.
Commissioner Bush?
Here.
Commissioner Chapman?
Here.
Commissioner Ake?
Here.
Commissioner Wingard?
Here.
Vice Mayor Alsager?
Here.
Mayor Perschbacher?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum, so we will continue our meeting. There are no proclamations or presentations today, so I'll move on to any additions or deletions to the agenda. None recognized. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
I move. Seconded.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, no. At this time, we are moving on to public input on agenda items. If you would like to speak on something that is part of the agenda, you'll be asked to step up to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. If you're joining us by Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature or *9 if you're joining Zoom by phone. You'll be let into the meeting. You'll be asked to state your name and your address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to come forward at this time? Is there anyone on Zoom?
There is none.
Okay. I don't see anyone that wants to come forward, so we're going to close the public input and move on to the receipt of petitions and communications. Manager dissents?
Receipt of petitions and communications this evening includes the minutes of the Planning Commission from August.
Are there any items in the consent items that the commission would like to be removed from the consent calendar and moved into the agenda? Seeing none, manager dissents?
Consent items this evening includes approval of the minutes from the regular meeting held September 11, 2023. Consider approval of a contract with Wanzi Tree Service of Alma for 2024-2025 tree trimming and removal. Consider authorization of a grant application assurance form as part of a Mount Pleasant Area Community Foundation grant request for thermal imaging equipment for $38,823. Consider a resolution authorizing an amendment to the standard lighting contract with Consumers Energy for the Pickard-Bradley intersection. Consider resolution authorizing Michigan Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forestry Program grant application, Town Center Civic Space Project for $38,999. Receive an ordinance to amend the city snow and ice removal from sidewalks ordinance and set a public hearing for October 9, 2023 on the same. Receive an ordinance to amend the city parking ordinance and set a public hearing for October 29, 2023 on the same. Consider approval of a budget amendment for the city's network firewall for $12,290. Receive an ordinance to amend Table 154.405A, District Standards, CD4 General Urban and CD5 Urban Center Character Districts of the Mount Pleasant zoning ordinances regarding driveway widths and set a public hearing for October 23, 2023 on the same. Receive an ordinance to amend Table 154.410A, Building and Lot Principal Use, Section 154.410B, Special Uses, and Article 7 of the Mount Pleasant zoning ordinances regarding institutional uses and set a public hearing for October 23, 2023 on the same. Receive an ordinance to amend Table 154.405A, District Standards, CD3L Suburban Large, CD3 Suburban, and CD4 General Urban Character Design Districts of the Mount Pleasant zoning ordinances regarding the ratio of houses versus garage at frontage and set a public hearing for October 23, 2023 on the same, and consider approval of payrolls and warrants.
At this time, I will ask for a motion to accept the consent items as presented.
I move. Seconded.
All right, all those in favor say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. We do not have any public hearings tonight, but we do have some new business. We're going to consider the prioritization and approval of the submission of the city request for fall 2023 Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe 2% allocation. Manager dissents?
So the City Commission annually reviews staff requests for 2% allocation grants to the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe. As part of this review, the City Commission is asked to rank the top 5 projects for consideration from the tribe. Staff will then provide the collective top 5 rankings to the tribe while submitting all the grant applications. The Tribal Council considers these priority projects listed by the City Commission when making their awards. So we then ask that the City Commission each provide us with your top 5 projects.
All right, so I'm going to start at the end here with Commissioner Eke.
Seriously? All right. No problem. I'm ready. Okay, but before I do that, I have questions for Director Lauria.
Is there a condensed list on a certain page number?
It was page.
No, go
Yes,
down.
there
It is further down, yeah.
It's page.
Yeah, I know, I left my list at home. So
It's
I'm trying to-
page 60.
60. I'm way past that.
So Director Lauria, I need you to explain your 2 critical
There it is. Thank you.
critical submissions. The body camera and the aerial fire apparatus.
The, obviously, the body cameras would be new, but currently we have recording infrastructure in our patrol vehicles that is years past end of life, that's failing, and is critical to be replaced in each of the patrol vehicles. As far as the aerial fire apparatus, it's going on its 27th year. We're in the beginning phases of putting out an RFP to replace that piece of equipment. It's a high dollar piece of equipment that's needed, obviously, for the high rises and the taller buildings that are in the community.
Okay. All right. So I also have question for parks. You gonna answer that?
I might be able to,
All
or
right,
our Parks
so-
Director,
well-
Phil Biscorner, might be able to. But
Okay,
what is the
well,
question?
parks, so, didn't we discuss some external funding for this particular project at some point?
We
Did we?
Yeah, we did. You know what? I'm going to actually ask that Director Biscorner
I'm
come
trying
up
to
and
make
talk
sure my
about it.
memory is doing the right thing.
Yeah, because Director Biscorner was, well, he was able to successfully apply for external funding for this, but this being a expensive project, it is going to need a little bit more funding, so I'll turn it over to him.
Okay,
Yeah, so we applied for an MDOT TAP grant and received that grant for 400,000. The overall project is 1.3 million. And so there is some funding coming from the township as well, Union Township. And
Do you
then
know how
our
much?
piece. I want to say it's 300,000.
okay. All right, last question. I have a question for water, line disposal. I recall we talked about this too at some point in one of your presentations. Okay. So how urgent is it? I know it's high. I apologize to my colleagues, but I have questions.
I'm glad you went first.
Yeah, so that's an important project to us because we've got that spent line at the water plant that needs to be taken care of. We've got that budgeted for next year, but this would help us do a little bit more than we have budgeted for, so.
About how much are you talking about for next year budget?
I think we have 400,000, 429.
And the total?
That's the total budgeted for next year.
Okay,
And
so you're asking for approximately 50% of it here?
Right.
Okay. Director Lauria, thank you. Director Lauria, back to you. Listen, you asked me to go first, so I need some clarity before I do what I'm gonna do. So Director Lauria, what happens if the body camera, you don't get the body camera this year? Will the sky fall?
No, the sky's not going to fall.
But how, you said critical, how critical?
The total project is critical,
Okay,
which if our car cameras, which have served us well, are dying. I worked on one today and it's just way past the end of life service for the equipment. And at a minimum, though, those need to be replaced next year. It has to happen. I can't put it any clearer than that. The body cameras are all part of the project because everything integrates. They can be added later, but there was interest from the community and the tribe about wanting body cameras.
okay. All right. Building, who is responsible for that? Manager?
I can certainly do my best to try to answer that question.
So why is this high?
It's a high priority, just
important.
given that it's a goal and objective for the city commission to move forward with a climate change sustainability plan in 2024, and this is something that would feed into that plan.
Okay. Okay. Oh, Jesus.
You want me to go? Well, you,
No.
okay, I was just trying to help.
Thank you. No. I know. I have, okay, so I'm gonna go with, aerial fire and police, vehicle and body camera, airports, the building energy efficiency and sustainability, and then, what's another one? Okay, and the lime disposal. Do I have 5? I have more than 5, but you know what? Lori, I made it difficult.
You have 5 now. Commissioner Asman?
Sure, and they're not in any particular order, are they?
No, I
Okay.
just,
That's
those are
fine.
my,
The 3 critical ones, the runway and taxi rehab, aerial fire apparatus, vehicle body cam, project, and then Pickard Bradley traffic signal for me, and the lime disposal.
Okay. Commissioner Wingard?
Yep. Energy efficiency and building sustainability, 1303 North Franklin, former landfill remediation monitoring, aerial fire apparatus, which I think is currently 26 years because I can keep,
27, he said.
well, it was in 97 and I was born in 97, so I got a pretty good lock on it.
He said 27, that's what I wrote down. 26 plus, I guess.
Close Crawford Road sidewalk gaps, and lime disposal.
Okay. Commissioner Bush?
I would like to see the pathway, the fire apparatus. I think that both of the sewer projects are also important for a climate change preparedness type awareness and something that, needs to happen. And the Pickard and Bradley traffic signal. And then at our last meeting, I made the really kind of tough emotional decision to pick all really like practical ones. And all of these are obviously important, but I do think it's important also to think also with our hearts to a certain extent and vision. And for that reason, I'm going to throw the organics in there because I'd like to, stay focused on what's needed, but also, show that the commission is interested in trying new things.
Okay, so what would that be?
Oh, that's the organics,
The water resource recovery.
the water resource recovery.
It's at the end.
Food waste.
The food waste.
Okay, but for clarification, you said both sewer projects, so.
Well, I don't know Pickard is what I put, but there's 2 different grants, so you can pick which one. I don't know why they're, yeah.
Pickard's at high.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Pickard was the one, Pickard was at high, so I picked Pickard. Yeah, sorry, that wasn't clear, yeah.
You just wanted 6.
I want 7, actually, but I don't get 7.
We don't get 6.
Commissioner Chapman?
Runway taxi, way rehab, aerial fire apparatus, the police vehicle and body cam project, Pickard and Bradley traffic signal, and Pickard storm sewer.
Vice Mayor?
I'm going to match you on 4 of those. The 3 critical ones, the runway taxi rehab, the police vehicles and body cameras, and the aerial fire apparatus. And in my mind, the 4th one to me was the pathway, GKB pathway. And then it seemed like that would be kind of a silly one to have that go through without having the traffic signal at Pickard and Bradley. So there's my 5.
Are you caught up? Okay. Runway taxiway rehab, the aerial fire apparatus, the police vehicle and body cam, Pickard storm sewer, and the GKB Riverwalk.
Why can't we just have a sixth one? I mean, I have 7 good ones here, you know.
All right, so we have those. They will figure out which ones we matched on, send them over to the tribe. All right, at this time, we're moving on to announcements on city-related issues and new business. This is where the commission and any of the staff wishes to bring something forward, new business or announcements for the area. Does anyone have anything they'd like to announce? Commissioner Wingard.
Yeah, following up on the reminder to get your COVID booster this fall. There, you can now get 4 free COVID tests shipped to your home for free by going to covid.gov/tests. So feel free to please take advantage of that free opportunity to keep your family healthy.
Commissioner Bush.
Just an announcement, I'm hoping that most people have got a chance to go to the Mount Pleasant Farmers Market this summer. It's been a great season, and they'll only be open for about another month, so it's a great time to go to the farmers market.
Anyone? Commissioner Eke?
Indigenous Peoples' Day is coming up next week, so the city, no, not
2 weeks.
2 weeks, second Monday in October, next week. So, and the city, also proclaimed, so did CMU, proclaim Indigenous, second week in October, Indigenous, Peoples' Day. So I hope people honor that particular day, in respect for the Indigenous people of this land and of the community where we live and work.
Anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? No? Okay. We'll move on to public comment on agenda and non-agenda items. If you're in the public sitting with us today, you can come up to the podium. You will be asked to state your name and address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. If you are joining us by Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature or *9. If you're joining Zoom by phone, you'll be moved into the meeting and be asked to state your name and address, and you'll be given 5 minutes. Is there anyone who wishes to speak at this time?
Speak about those.
Can you step to the podium so everyone can hear you? Thank you. And what is your name?
And Douglas Collins.
Okay.
And I'll just say I live in Winchester Towers.
Okay.
And, they're just sort of a headache, those scooters. They just seem like they're on the lawns and that stuff, and those people have to lift and take them up. They're heavy, and also they clutter up the sidewalks. And I'm a low vision person, and I probably, if I go to a function at night, I probably have to use a cane to be able to get around there. I usually don't need a cane. My vision's not bad enough for a cane, but I probably have to use that. And people with motorized wheelchairs, they have trouble getting around it. And I just don't. Somebody said they only go about 8 miles per hour. They go a little bit faster than that. They probably go about 12 or so, probably. But I just don't think we really need those things around there, and they're a headache.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom that wishes to speak?
Nobody on Zoom.
Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment, and we're going to move into our work session, which is the 2024 proposed operating budget. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. It is my privilege to present the 2024 proposed operating budget to you tonight. Tonight's presentation is going to be a pretty high-level overview. There's going to be a couple things that we're going to want to get into discussion with at the end of the work session, because we want City Commission input, and we just want to give you guys a more detailed update on a couple things. Quite honestly, the budget is probably one of my favorite things that we do here, because we start talking about next year, and I don't know why, I just get excited about like, we're gonna do this next year, and it's never as much fun when we get there, but it's really fun to plan it, I guess. So with that, the City Commission came up with 9 goals, and pretty much everything in this budget should be either directly moving us towards those goals, or it should be basically keeping the organization in such a place that we can support these goals in other ways. These goals include maintaining our financial operations, having positive relationships with the community, walkable, bikeable infrastructure, community space in the downtown, parks and rec programming, sense of place, addressing housing needs, maximizing economic development in the community, and getting the Mount Pleasant Center property ready for the future. Every budget has its challenges, and inflation has really taken a whack on us and probably everybody in this room over the past couple of years. With that, both our peak and recreation programs have funding challenges that are coming up, and this budget does have some proposed fee increases, but it's really not enough to cover the shortfall. However, we're really limited in how much and how fast we can raise rates, because otherwise you start making it to where kids can't participate in the programs. And so this is one of the things at the end we want to get some more discussion going on, or what we want to do with peak and recreation. For our Act 51 funding, this is the state gas tax that funds all of our road and sidewalk projects. And it's sort of the double whammy there, where we've got all the inflation on the capital projects, and at the same time, because of the 2020 census, our Act 51 funding went down by about 15%. So we have all of the same number of miles of sidewalk and road to take care of, but we have less money to do it with. And the projects that we do want to do are coming in, 15 to 30% more than, engineering estimates that are not very old. And it's amazing, because at times the engineer's like, here's the price, and let's just put a contingency on top of it. And then the project still comes in 20% above that. So that's sort of what we're facing in our street funds. We have a number of MTT, so Michigan Tax Tribunal cases out there. A lot of our landlords are making the case that due to vacancies, their properties are worth less because they're not full up due to the lower enrollment at CMU. So that's out there. We still don't have them settled for 2023. So I can't give you a dollar value on what that loss is, but just be aware that it's out there, and there'll be maybe more cases coming next year with more landlords. So overall, we're going to spend about $52.7 million next year. And just as a quick reminder, enterprise funds are things like water, sewer, airport. They're more or less designed to be self-sustaining with the fees that they collect. Our internal service funds are our self-insurance fund, both health and liability. It's also our motor pool. Our general fund are the general operations of the city. And then our special revenue funds are things like major streets, local streets, the principal shopping district special assessment, things that have sort of a restricted funding source, where if we take the money in, we have to use it for only certain things. And our component units are things like our TIFA and our DDA. Focusing just on the general fund, we're going to bring in just over $20 million next year. This includes ARPA funding. Actually, before I get into that, let me back up. As you can see, and it's pretty much the same for any municipality, property taxes are the lion's share of our revenue. And then the intergovernmental, that includes state share revenue. So those are the two largest ticket items in our general fund revenue. So ARPA funds were required to recognize that revenue when we actually spend the money. And next year, we've got $525,000 going into the GKB Trail, a little over $1.1 million going into Town Center. And then next year we'll be approaching the City Commission with what we want to do with the remaining ARPA dollars. I know earlier this year you guys did some prioritization, but we'll come back and update you with project timelines and just make sure that we've got a plan for the remaining ARPA dollars. We're assuming the same millage rate at 16.25 mils. We're looking at about a 3% increase in taxable value is what our estimate is right now, and that is both commercial and residential. Residential is definitely fueling more of the increase than commercial, but all in all, anytime it's a positive number, it's a good thing for the city. We've updated our state shared revenue in this budget to the latest projections from the state. We anticipate it to go up about $30,000 next year. And for a frame of reference, that's about 1%. Our state shared revenue is worth about $3 million a year. This is just sort of a look back over the recent history for our millage rates and how it's sort of broken down. The red piece are things that have a dedicated millage, so like our police and fire pension, our storm sewer, half a mil, and prior to this year being for storm sewer, we used it to pay off the board and building bonds, and then the 1.5 mils for capital, and everything else in blue is basically for general operations. So looking at the general fund, not surprisingly, because this is really the fund where we have a lot of services provided, police, fire, parks, et cetera. Not surprisingly, the largest expense out of that is going to be compensation and benefits, because that's primarily we're paying people to deliver those services. And here's just another way to look at the general fund. Similar to any other city you go to, I think you would see public safety and community services as being the big ticket items in the general fund. So overall, it's mainly status quo, nothing overly surprising. A couple things worth mentioning. We have a fire study going right now, and the fire study is going to wrap up by the end of the year. But we just don't have enough information at this time to put it in the budget. So if there's anything for next year's budget that comes out of that, we'll have to bring it to you as a standalone amendment and probably a bigger discussion. 2023, at our last meeting on September 11th, I reported to you that we're going to finish 2023 stronger than what we anticipated. It's some one-time things like investment earnings, property taxes, et cetera. So we're going to end up better off this year than what we thought we were going to. And staff's recommendation is to take about $550,000 and put it into the MERS pension system. And what this could do for us is pay down future unfunded liabilities. And then that money can sit there and earn investment earnings over time that are greater than what we have the ability as a city to invest in. And so really it's an investment in future contributions in making Mount Pleasant affordable further into the future. We now have our Parks and Recreation are both managed by Director Biscorner, and we did that for a couple of reasons. One, just efficiency, and then trying to get these two departments that really have to work together. Having one person over both of them, it enhances the synergy between those two departments. Looking at where the general fund is going to end up as far as fund balance, we're going to probably need to use about $70,000 of unassigned fund balance to close the operating budget next year. That will still leave us with approximately $5.9 million in unassigned fund balance, which is 29% of expenditures. And the city commission's policy is that we have to have a minimum of 15%. So at 29%, we're still pretty healthy for next year. For the assigned portion of the fund balance, we want to continue our $200,000 annual contribution into the fire truck reserve. So when these pieces of equipment come up, that can cost, $500,000 to $700,000, or in the case of a ladder truck, over $1 million. This is just our way of sort of planning for those future large expenses, and then being able to afford them as they come due, because you don't want to go out and borrow money with interest rates the way they are right now in the market. We're going to plan on having around $640,000 at the end of 2024 that will be available for economic initiatives. Going back to, we talked a little bit about the street funds. So for 2024, we actually had to transfer an additional $140,000 out of our major streets to our locals to get to the $167,000, which is basically just meeting the minimum fund balance policy. So when we sit down to do the capital improvement plan next year, we're going to have to do a pretty hard look at what's really the priority, what's really critical. And there's no shortage of projects that we want to do that would be great and a good idea, but we really have to make sure we're just taking care of the basic infrastructure. We have 7 overlays on Arnold, Adams, Elm, Edgewood, Deming, May, and Brown Street scheduled for next year. We have no reconstructs planned for next year. Here's just a listing of the projects that we're going to plan on funding with our dedicated 1.5 millage rate. I'll give you guys a minute just to kind of look those over. In total, they come up to just a little over $1.1 million.
Could you go back
Sure.
for a second?
Yep.
Okay.
Out at the airport, we're going to be doing our taxiway A rehab construction. Very expensive project, if I'm remembering correctly. It's a little over $2 million. 95% of that is paid for from either the state or the federal government, and we're on the hook for 5% of it. At the water resource recovery facility, we're continuing the major plant upgrades that we've been doing, and we should be wrapping up phase 1 by the end of this year. So we'll be getting into the second and final phase starting next year. Our plan at solid waste is to keep going with our no-fee brush pickup twice a year. That's a very successful program. I believe that just opened up, and it took almost it might already be full. Last I knew earlier today, there was only 8 slots left. So when we open that up, it gets used in a hurry. It's full. It's full. In water, we're anticipated to do a little over 1.2 million in capital projects. We'll talk more about water and sewer in just a second. We'll talk more about parks and recreation. The building permit and zoning appeal, basically we have some fee increases proposed. And what we do every 5 or 6 years is we just look at what it actually costs us for staff time, staff rates, and then we just adjust the permit fees based on what it actually costs to issue the permits. Some of the permits we've actually gotten more efficient at, so you'll see there's like a schedule in the budget book of what's increasing, what's not changing. Some of the things we've gotten more efficient at, so while staff costs have gone up a little bit, we just do them a little bit quicker, so some of them are no change on the fee. So at the bottom of this chart, you can see our 2023 actual expenditures. And if a household used 5,000 gallons, which is sort of an average for a family, it would be right now $53.61. We're proposing between water and sewer, the average bill would go up $4.17. And every year I always start this with looking at the city's rates. And every year I think, oh my man, this is the year that probably on this chart, we're not going to look good compared to our neighbors. And then I go find out what their rates are. And the city of Mount Pleasant delivers an absolute steal on our water and sewer for what our residents pay versus what they get compared to our surrounding communities, especially the quality of our water compared to some of our neighboring communities. We do a fantastic job there. We're going to talk more about recreation and peak. A couple things, we probably are going to have changes to solid waste and recycling next year. We don't have enough information right now about what that looks like, but the two things that staff is looking at, and we're talking with contractors, is what would it look like if we went from a bag tag system to like a bin pickup system. And additionally, the county has a lot of things going on at the MRF, and we don't really have enough information or details about what that's going to look like. So we know there's probably going to be a change. We just can't tell you what that's going to be at this time. Excuse me. So tonight we have a work session on fees. October 23rd, we have that reserved for any city commission questions now that we've been through the presentation, and you guys will have some more time to look over the budget document. We respectfully request that send any questions you have to City Manager DeSense by October 9th. We have a public hearing scheduled for November 13th, and then the charter requires that we adopt the budget by the last meeting in December. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Manager DeSense to key up the peak and recreation fees.
All right.
I'm sorry, are there any questions on the budget other than parks and recreation fees, or parks and recreation and peak fees?
Seeing none? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to keep a few things, and I do want to bring streets into the conversation as well, too, because as you'll see at the beginning of Director Saladine's presentation here, we had 3 key main issues that came up in our discussion for the 2024 proposed budget. And maybe even to start that conversation, I just want to note on some of the wins that we had. General fund doing significantly better in 2022, 23, and 24 as we continue to move forward. But some of those improvements, I would say, in the overall health of the general fund did come at a cost, obviously. Organizationally, we looked at ways that we could be more efficient efficient, that we could restructure, that we could become a more lean organization. And so as some positions became open, essentially through attrition, we had chosen not to fill those positions. We had restructured departments within the organization. We're able to achieve some significant annual cost savings going forward. Now, that also comes with the note, though, that from the presentation we had on the pension systems just at our last city commission meeting, we do have increased contributions to those systems going forward. Thus, the recommendation from staff to try to do greater increases on the front end here, so that way those dollars can achieve a higher interest rate rather than just kind of paying as we go or paying what MERS is telling us to pay. So, like I said, overall, some significant wins within the general fund. The main issues that we were having in structuring this budget, one, as you had heard, was on the streets end. Between the inflationary increases, which is on the expense end, and also the decrease in revenues in Act 51 dollars, mostly tied to the lower population that we have in the city of Mount Pleasant, the city is utilizing about $1 million per year, has used $1 million in fund balance on average to cover the gap within the street funds. Now, that is to continue to maintain our streets at the high level of expectation that we have had over the years. And I can tell you that the city's streets score significantly higher than a lot of other municipalities' streets. That really is the way it should be. I'll say, one, that's absolutely how you would want to fund your streets program in the future here. But we'll have to look at that problem from a couple of different ways. One, it's just the understanding that on the revenue end from the state, there's no means of increasing that revenue. The state just simply sets that revenue based on the taxes that they receive. They give you a formula and they say, here's what you're going to get over the next couple of years. So program that out, and that's what we get. So on the revenue end, we're fairly limited in terms of getting external dollars. There's always some programs out there that offer grants, but they're far and few between. And all of us cities are always trying to fight each other to get them. And then you got to understand that's not a way of operating, let's say, into the future. Obviously, that's more like the booster shot, if you will, just the one-time deal that's going to get you through for a year, but in the next year, you're not going to be guaranteed those funds going forward. On the expenses side, it's very hard to deal with operations and maintenance and adjust that significantly in order to offset the high cost that we're seeing. And that's really what I want to frame up for the city commission here. The high cost of doing these projects, and I won't forget when we were talking about this as a staff in 2022, it's all right, let's expect inflation's getting high. We're seeing it in materials, we're seeing it in labor. That's entirely your receipt when you get a new street or when you do a new construction. So let's try to program those higher. And staff really did their best to try to get those estimates higher, throwing on contingencies, looking at what other cities were doing. It just seems, though, that the momentum in the pricing for streets reconstruction just continues to grow, unfortunately. And what we had anticipated last year, okay, let's throw 20% on top of that. Let's throw 30% on top of it. They're still coming in higher. So there just doesn't seem to be much of an end in sight on that end. So on the revenues end, then we're fairly limited between state tax dollars. So there's really only two ways that I would see that we'd be able to address this issue. One, that's revenue from other sources, either general fund or capital improvements fund, but then you also see how that's tied into a lot of our other funds as well too. That could start to shorten our general fund. That could start to put the squeeze on other funds that rely on those funds. And the way that I describe this to other commissions and everyone that I work with really is the pie analogy. It's probably fairly old, but ultimately it's as we start to dedicate more resources or more of the pie to another cause, you have to understand that always affects other funds or affects other slices of the pie as well too. So that's more or less just what I wanted to tee up on the streets end. And I also want to reinforce what I'm going to say here is we don't plan on solving all these problems tonight. These things will be ongoing, but it's certainly something to have in the back of our minds as we start to talk about other things. You'll see that I keep coming back to a theme here, and we may have to look at general fund or we may have to look at capital improvements fund to help out some of these other funds. And I think the main question to the city commission is going to be, well, what are our priorities going to be into the future? Moving from streets, we move into peak and recreation. And peak had received significant support from the federal government here in shoring up childcare across the nation, and we received significant funds from the feds. Now, at this point, we'll be ending 2023 with roughly $1 million in total fund balance, and that seems very significant. However, peak spends right now, as it's currently billed out, it's currently billed to spend $877,000 in 2024, with only about $300,000 in change coming into the program in terms of fees and everything like that. It then requires about $500,000 in 2024 and in 2025 to sustain that gap. That leaves us with no fund balance beyond Q1 of 2026. Obviously, $500,000 is very significant. We would have to take a look at what options we have to try to shore up that funding. And there's a few of them, and I think that this would be part of a deeper conversation. But once again, as we start to look at other sources of funds, we do need to ask ourselves then, how does that priority work? Where does peak land in priority versus broader recreation needs versus streets needs, et cetera? And then just to go into recreation a little bit as well too, we're currently undergoing a recreation needs assessment. But one thing to highlight to the City Commission is that already our recreation program as built requires a contribution from the general fund of $425,000 to sustain it. Our recreation fees typically pay for the assistants that we have on the fields who are running our soccer programs and those kind of things. They're paying for our recreation assistance. But what it's falling short of in that fee structure is the administration behind it. It's having a Parks and Recreation director to monitor the whole thing. It's having office staff that take the registrations, that process the billing, et cetera, those kind of things. So already, as I said, $425,000 goes from the general fund to support that program. And so that's just one of those things to think about as we go into the future. So wanted to tee that up to the City Commission, and overall, I think the idea or the broader philosophy here is how should we look at these projects and programs and how do we prioritize them going into the future, understanding that we have limited funds. Do we want to proceed with regularly funding programs that require either tax subsidies or grant funds for operation? And keep in mind that the grant fund piece is very important, because one has to think about, as you're programming operations on an annual basis, if you don't get that grant funding, and I know some of you work on nonprofit boards or work for nonprofits, if you don't get that grant funding, you can be in a lot of trouble. The idea that if the grants fund 100% of that program and that they need those grant funds, and if they don't come through that year, your notification to the individuals could be very quick turnaround, a couple of months before you say, hey, unfortunately, this program is no longer going to be offered because the grants didn't come through. So something we'll want to think about as we move forward in those kind of conversations. And then also if subsidy or assistance from the general fund is the way we want to go with some of these programs, what's the appropriate level? Is there a percentage that we want to see as a cost share? Is there certain ways that we want to look at the structure of that? And so these are more or less philosophical questions, things I just wanted to put in everyone's mind, arm you, so to say, for the future conversations on these kind of things, different ways of looking at the problem as we move forward here. With that, does anyone have, again, that's a foundational piece here, and I know I've thrown a lot. Again, I want to come back to, I have no anticipation that we're leaving this room having 1, 2, 3 solved, boom, just like that. These, I think, are going to be ongoing conversations. But I would say what's significant to this is as we talk about streets, this is something that, as Director Saladin had pointed out, we'll run a low fund balance going into 2024. And so we have some time to figure that one out. With peak, as I said, that fund balance runs out at the beginning of 2026. So we've got a couple of years to figure that one out as well, too. And recreation is one that we're programmed out through 2024 as it currently stands. So I just wanted to stress to the City Commission, we do have some time on these things, but I did want to get them in front of you.
Okay, so I have some questions here. Based on what the document you submitted, you indicate that the recipients or the people who benefit from peak, that about 50, am I correct? 50% are non-residents, right?
That's correct.
So, and you say something similar for recreation too.
Yeah, on the recreation side, it varies on the
60?
program between 60
Yeah,
and
60.
70%.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
we typically, when doing the calculations,
Okay.
average it at about 65%.
Okay, so, all right. And am I, to understand that because these programs have federal funding and some funding from us in general, that there is no charge. They are free to.
No, there are fees associated with it as well, too, so.
How much do non-residents pay and how much do residents pay? That's where I'm going with this, my question.
Let me see if I can
I
go
believe
ahead
it's
and
equal.
point to the right one.
From what I understood, there was no difference between.
I just need to know what the amount is.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I was just saying that I believe it's an equal fee between residents and non-residents.
Okay.
just gonna-
For peak, but there's different fees for recreation
Yep.
programming,
Yeah,
right?
and I need, and this document, maybe I didn't read it correctly, but my document doesn't say it. So I just need that information,
Yep, if
because
you,
that would help me in my thinking.
Commissioner Ecke, on Roman numeral page 9 in the budget document, there's an entire fee schedule, and there's dozens of lines, and some of them don't vary between resident and non-resident, and then some of them vary quite a bit between resident and non-resident.
Yeah, I apologize, I didn't go to that document. I just, I'm looking at materials sent to us, so, okay. So thank you again, Chris. So my assumption, so we do recover, we recover some, I suppose some revenue, I'm gonna put that in parentheses, but not enough to sustain it.
that's correct.
That's what I'm hearing. Okay, so here is a hypothetical question. So if one were to say to you, let's work on percentages in terms of increase, in terms of what's gonna be charged to participants, what might the percentage look like? Have you thought about that?
I have not myself. I don't have a recommendation here for the city commission at this time. I just wanted to engage in general conversation to see, one, it could be the city commission is just comfortable and says, the recreation breakdown, as you have described it, Manager DeSense, is very reasonable and we're good with that amount. And if that's the case, that's fine. What I want to know is, coming out of this conversation, should we look at it from a different structure? Should it be 50-50? Should it be 75-25? Do you want to see a sort of comparison of something like that? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, and that's where I'm going with my questions, because it seems to me that, if I were a resident, I don't have, besides being city commissioner, I don't have a kid, I'm sympathetic. I do have a kid, but I don't have a kid in the programs. I'm sympathetic. But if I were a resident and, looking at this saying, okay, so, residents also pay taxes, plus then they pay a fee for, for participating in the program. Whereas non-residents don't necessarily pay taxes, although they pay, certain fee for, taking advantage of the program. So what is, equitable? That's the word that I want. What's equitable in this case? Okay, so, conversation piece. What obtains in other communities? How, you're based on what you're saying, this is not sustainable after 2 years. If we stay at this rate, it's not sustainable. Otherwise, we are going to have to foot it. Okay, does the city want to foot it? And that's where I'm going with this. In that case, therefore, I want to see what's possible. What, similar programs in other communities, what do they look like? What do they do? What might be equitable for our own residents so that they don't feel that, there is an imbalance here where they're paying taxes as well as additional fee to take advantage of a program offered by the city, whereas, the non-residents are not. That's where I'm going. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but this is where my
No,
head is
no,
right
that makes
now.
sense.
Very much so.
Talking about programs, just to the rest of the commission, I personally think like the peak program not being like a loss of funding and everything, I think it's something that would be important for us to maintain. I mean, I think it's pretty well known that childcare is hard to come by and everything in our area. So there's a lack of childcare programs. Again, I've not had a child in peak program or at all, so I can't say with absolute certainty what that looks like. But I know from conversation that it's difficult to find a place to put your kid that's a good program. I think a lot of people probably rely on this, and clearly a lot of people, not even city residents. Could I get clarification? I've spent a lot of time focusing on the peak program. What's the, how does the school district play into that? There was reference to the school district into the peak program, and I'm not certain how that plays into it.
Yeah, I'm going to have Parks and Recreation Director Phil Biscorner come up and talk about it because he's closer to the operations of the program than I am.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
So as far as the peak program goes, we are running really close to 50-50 with residents and non-residents. However, the way that the program has been set up, it is based on school district resident and non-school district resident. So that resident, non-resident doesn't really play a huge part in that system. But the reason why the school district is so involved is because we use their facilities. So we use all their schools, or not all of them, but some of their schools. We have 3 sites in the summer, 5 sites during the season. And we use their food service for our lunches and different things for our programs.
Gotcha. So it's based upon being a resident, like fees and everything are based on, are you a part of the public school district versus
Are you
outside of
in
that
Mount
district?
Pleasant Schools district?
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Eke?
So, am I to understand therefore that we're paying fees to the public school for the usage of their of their structures, or is it free?
So we do not pay for the use of their buildings. We do pay for the food program, the food that we use, and we pay for the janitorial services.
Okay, okay. Where does the highest percentage of the peak funding goes to staffing?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yep, and in order to get staffing, you have to get to those levels. We use a lot of the students from CMU that are in the education program.
Okay.
Just because they need those hours and everything as well. So they count towards their schooling.
Are they paid or
They're paid.
is this
They're paid.
internship? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, so they are paid. I know that you talked about good caregivers, right? For the daycare section of, yeah?
Yeah.
So where does Peak draw its, the caregivers,
The staffing?
the staffing for,
The majority of our staffing comes from CMU. And
they
local
are also
residents.
students?
Yes.
Okay. What are you paying them? I'm curious because they're my students. By the hour,
Historically, they're between $12 and $15 an hour based on experience, and that's for the day staff. The site coordinators are paid on a higher scale, just because they supervise those individuals.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions?
When did we get the federal grant originally that allowed us to do the peak program? The original grant, yeah.
2003.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So, and that, by the sounds of it, it's no longer, it's not something we can just reapply for. Gotcha.
Actually, my colleague just asked you, so, asked you part of my question. So what I'm hearing is that we cannot apply for this grant again?
Correct.
Are there other sources of funding that we could go to? Kellogg Foundation, Ford Foundation, Dow,
Historically, the only other source of funding that we've gone to is the 2%. And
But, okay, so that means that, so what I'm trying to do is sort of suggest a shift in paradigm or a shift in terms of how we're looking at things. So historically, we've gone for the 2%. Are we envisioning going for the 2% then?
we're gonna have to figure out how to move forward at this point. The thought is trying to figure out how to move forward if something happens to the grant funding. So if all of a sudden, all the grant funds dry up, we're on the hook for $500,000 a year.
Okay, but if, again, hypothetically, we have relied primarily on federal, maybe state funding, and then internal funding. Okay, so the grants are external, I understand, and then we go for 2%, I understand. Is it possible to look at other areas to see what else is out there? Just again, hypothetically, because this is, like your backup. If you don't get, we're asking the 2% funding for a lot. We've just sort of handed out our 5 top choices, right? And then, yes, of course, this is 2024, 2026. But let's say 2024, 2026, we probably have 5 top choices too, and a whole range of other things. But can we look at other areas, the U.S. Department of Education, maybe they have funding related to this, because this again has some educational,
We have been looking at funding opportunities. The most recent funding was through the federal government for childcare facilities. So we do have certain things that come across that we can apply for.
Okay.
It's just,
Even
they're
if
limited because it is what it is.
I understand. Even if it's small amounts, then it reduces how much we have to come up with. Okay.
Are there other Michigan municipalities that are dealing with like a similar type issue? I mean, I know Peak is a somewhat unique program, but there's other things out there like that.
Yeah, and I think, when you're looking at it, part of the problem is just what we charge. Because it roughly costs about $1,100 for a student to go through that program, and we don't charge 50% of that anywhere. And then, so you're looking at our lowest cost, we're coming up with almost $850 to cover one student to go through that program.
So why are you not charging up to 50%? I'm curious.
That's the historical charges that we've provided.
Okay.
I mean, and that's kind of why we're having this discussion is.
But I think that's also because we do have a high poverty rate in this town, or this county and in this city.
There is a very small sliding scale, but there's not much difference between yeah, if I remember correctly from the fees.
It's roughly 50% is the free and reduced lunch rate. And so you're roughly sitting at 500 is the max, but.
If I can too, yeah, as Director Ms. Corner said, just for instance, for the 6-week program that we run, the scholarship rate is $250. That's out of $1,100. So obviously, if we were to then jump that up, even let's just say to a 50% cost, $550, the $300 I think is a big hit to some of the families. And so I think that's structurally just something I want to point out to the City Commission is as we start to play with things like fees and such like that, we start to get out of that potentially the affordability aspect of that. To answer Commissioner Bush's question as well to the uniqueness of this program, I don't know of another municipally ran program that is like Peak.
No.
Typically, these are run by school districts.
That's true. some of the ones I know are run by school districts. So do you have to have a 6-week program? Must you have a 6-week program?
It comes down to philosophy, when, like we said earlier, with just the childcare issues that we have, that this is we have roughly 300 kids go through the program every summer.
What does the school district say about, I'm assuming they're involved in this conversation about the risk to peak in the next few years?
I can just say that I had a conversation with the school leadership just to let them know that this conversation was coming, just so then that way they wouldn't tune into the city commission meeting and not have this be a
Right.
surprise. I just said this will be a long, a conversation that we'll have over time. Again, the same line that I've given to the city commission. We've got a couple of years to try to figure something out here to address that. So I just let them know. Haven't really had any serious conversations on, let's say, resources or anything else.
If the school district was more of a school district program than a city program, would there be access to other funds like what we just passed at a state level? Lots of different monies going to schools. Is any of that for school aftercare programs?
That I don't know.
Mm-hmm. There goes. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another question I would have is concerning sources of funding while we're on the topic. 50% of the students aren't in our school district. Based on, we know their addresses because
No, not school district, they're residents.
The residents.
City.
So even though it's kind of confusing on how we put it, so 50% of the program are residents, but that doesn't mean that that's 50% are school district residents.
Gotcha. So the 50% who aren't within our municipality control, we know where they live, they're the municipality that they're a part of. We could identify, would it be, if, for example, the majority of them are living in Union Township, would it be possible at all to reach out to Union Township to say, hey, this is a program that a lot of your residents seem to utilize? Can we bring in any funding from other sources, like fellow municipalities? The only other thing I have a question, so funds as we're currently using them are going to run out in 2025, end of 2025. Are we able to adjust our usage so we could, rather than spending $500,000 from the pool that we have each year, if we can seek out other sources of funding, is it possible to scale down that 500,000 to let's say 300,000, and we come up with 200,000 in additional grant funding, so it buys us a bit more time to structure out the program? Is that possible, or is 2025 a deadline for this grant?
I would say to both of your questions, if I can, the first one, we could look at other sources of funding. And again, just so the city commission understands, this is exactly the feedback that I wanted to hear, just to see where the city commission wanted to go or investigate with this. So that's always a possibility. And then if I'm hearing you correctly, could we look at other sources of funding? But then I know you had talked about that $500,000 gap was also part of that question, to look at expenses as well too, to try to trim that back.
Yes, looking at expense, cost of the programs. If we're facing a budget crunch on it, and if we can reduce the cost without reducing the quality, that's always a plus. But again, we have 500,000 for 2024, 500,000 for 2025, and then after that, we'd have to make up 500,000, and then after 2027, we 500,000 on. If we could, for example, find enough funding in time, could we take $100,000 off of the 2025 of what we're budgeting to 2025? So we have 500,000 next year, 2024. We have $500,000 budgeted for it. Can we find a $100,000 grant so we can put that other 100,000 back into the pool, so we can stretch this federal grant, the last 100,000 or $1 million that we have? Is there any way we could stretch that out so we can find less grant money but still carry on the project, push out the deadline essentially?
Yeah, a possibility, definitely.
Okay.
But even just part of the issue is scale too. It's $100,000 out of $500,000. It's 20%. You get an extra 20% of the year. Not insignificant, but that pushes us out 10 weeks roughly. So it's just, and again, why I wanted to have the conversation with the city commissioners, it's understanding that even grabbing a $100,000 grant, which to answer the question, yes, we could certainly look for even a win like that. With the scale that we're talking about, buys us 10 weeks, but yes, we can.
But that helps, which is, I'm glad that you're saying this too, because that's the question that I'm asking. What other sources can we find to help? Because we are talking sustainability. How do we sustain it? Maybe we're not going to sustain it at the top level that we have been sustaining it. It might mean, I don't know, reducing the number of people that you eventually admit. Are there other partnerships with banks? Yeah. Or other organizations that can come in as co-sponsors, in this case, the match, whatever it is that you're trying to get. So you get matching funds from other sources, even $25,000 from somebody. You get 4 of those from 4 different organizations that partner with you. You have your 100,000. And I think, what we need to do is just, figure out, I know that you're trying. I write grants, so which is why you hear me saying this. I know that you're trying. I know that grants are not, that sources of funding are drying up. But if we want to sustain this particular project, we're going to have to figure out different ways of doing it, So it might mean that we have to look for small pockets of money and several small pockets of money to help us, as opposed to that huge amount of money, right? Which may be 2%, okay? I'm just simply saying, even who are our partners in this besides the school? Who else could you envision partnering with? There are quite a few people in this community that have wealth, that are interested in seeing, the community's, well-being, right? Improving it. Can they be sponsors? Can we name maybe one day, a week after somebody, for a certain amount of money? I don't know. But these are things that we could probably explore. So I'm just simply throwing out these suggestions there to see what.
Commissioner Bush.
Small pockets of money are valuable. It is a little bit like counting your chickens before they hatch type thing. But yes, that we need to look for those. But one is, don't count chickens before they're hatched. Is we have several more recreational marijuana operations and licenses coming into the city. I don't want to spend the money before we have it, but one of the main ways the state funds is the lottery. I mean, we could use our vices for good here and perhaps, commit some of that money over the next couple of years to cut back on what we need to take out of the fund.
That's a good idea. A certain percentage of it can go towards that.
Vice Mayor.
I think I mentioned this last meeting that maybe through the community foundation, we could set up a fund there that people that have a lot of money can donate to the program through the community foundation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a nonprofit. It's a city program, right?
Correct.
So if it was a nonprofit, if there was a Friends of Peak or something like that. That's one of the reasons why I still think that we need to look at what it would look like if it was, sorry?
The city is not a for-profit.
Yes, it is not.
But you can't make a donation to the city.
No, but you can make a donation to the program.
To the program.
Yes.
Can you make a donation to Peak and it's a write-off?
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it is.
We can investigate that. And
But if you
see.
can make a donation, but if it was, what? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can make a donation to the city in terms of the write-off ability of that.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely certain that would be a
Well, that's
question.
what my point is. So if there was maybe, people might be more willing to make donations, especially of a large amount, if it was a tax write-off, And that's another reason to look at what it would look like if this was a school program as opposed to a city program. No? Or more of a cooperation rather than just on paper.
Or a collaborative with another entity. You've got so many other agencies in this community that serve,
Well, if
some of the people who come, families whose kids come to Peak. So,
Commissioner Bush.
I think one of the reasons why people have this perspective of Peak trying to be cheap, or supposed to be cheap, supposed to be affordable, supposed to be like, and even at such low prices that, people will still be frustrated at the price. I think one of the reasons why people think that is because they think it's like a school program. And so they know their school is free. And so I think that it's just, and you said most other communities that do something like this is a school program. I'd be interested to know, I know that Director Loria was shaking his head. I was just, no, you want to say?
I think that the school having to manage and recreate fill and all the rest of it, you're not talking a quick or small undertaking. It is huge. And we already have the program in place. And I'm not criticizing the public schools. I'm just saying, I don't see them having the resources to jump on it.
Well, what if they did something along the lines of contracted with Peak? So if they contracted with the city to provide Peak, but then we would have it being under school control, so you'd be access to monies that would be designated for education and school, not to mention it being a nonprofit that you could donate to and get tax write-offs.
For me, it seems like there's a lot of muddy water. I think for me, it seems, is this a priority for our community? When we look at the budget, is this a priority for the community? I look at the budget that Chris presented, $52 million. $500,000 is less than 1% of a $52 million budget. So if we say kids in our community are a priority, then why don't we figure out a way to put it in the budget and forget about this grant writing, forget about this. I mean, we make things too convoluted, too complicated. If it's important to our community, it's important to our commission, it's important to our city staff, then why don't we figure out a way to put in a $52 million budget and be done with it?
Well said.
Yeah.
well,
Vice Mayor.
I'm going to go back to what Commissioner Bush was talking about. I think part of the perception of Peak is that since at the beginning it was really, really well grant funded, is that it has been and should remain a low-cost program.
Yes.
And maybe that perception needs to change if the costs need to go up
But can it change? Like
gradually.
I think that's been going on because when we were on the Parks and Rec Commission, this was a discussion, because there was one year, I think it was 2015, where we didn't get the 2% grant. And you could just literally see, Ryan, like just the wind knocked out of his sail, just, whoa, I never even thought about what this would look like if we didn't get the 2% funding. It was a real humbling experience. So yeah, this is a consistent discussion, and like, Commissioner Chapman says, yeah, why is it more of a priority then, I guess? Did we just get too comfortable, but I also agree that it's important to have this discussion to find out if there's a better, more cost-effective way to do it in the first place.
Manager Dissens.
If I can, at least just to talk about the history of what got us here, and the Peak program hasn't used tax dollars in the past. It's typically been user fees. It's been support from grant programs. It's been support from the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe, and that's how we've gotten through in years. As Commissioner Bush had pointed out, there was a year, though, where we didn't get support, and it was a serious wake-up moment for staff at that point. And there was the possibility that the program was not going to continue at that point. However, certain donors had come through and were able to get through that period of time. And so that continues to go on. That does bring up the question of risk, though, and I know I had addressed that in a previous statement of what happens if you get to a year, though, where you don't get your regular donors and where you don't get other funds, and let's say there is no external donor source to come and sort of save the day.
Then you don't hold it.
That becomes an
What are
issue.
you going to do? Go rob a bank to hold it? No, you don't, if there's no money, there's no money.
Yeah. And my question to Director Biscorner, I know we were going to talk fees as well. The question had come up, or the point had come up about raising fees gradually over time. And that is what we are proposing with this budget as well, too. Would you be able to just highlight some of those fee increases from 23 going into 24? And I do want to note to the City Commission that the proposed fee increases that we have here are not insignificant to the program at all. We are talking about significant increases to the customer. But when you look at the total amount that it brings compared to the total gap in funding, you'll see that, again, it takes significantly more. And I think that the 6-week program really highlights that. The cost per head in that program would be $1,100 per individual, and we have a cost built in anywhere from $250 to even $600 on the high end. So, and like I said, that is an increase over the past year here. As we continue to go up, questions of affordability are brought up, but as Vice Mayor Alsager had pointed out, maybe that is one way to continue to maintain the program, but we might just have to do it at a different level of affordability, if you will.
What I think, just die.
Do you have a sliding scale?
So I think part of this discussion too has to move into, for peak purposes, because the majority of our other programs are resident, non-resident. Peak is school district, non-school district. So that doesn't necessarily mean they live within the city. And so when we're using those dollars for tax base, we're using those dollars for the entire school district as well. So that also has to be part of this conversation eventually. But basically, to highlight some of the things that we're looking at. So right now, peak currently for the 6-week summer session for non-Mount Pleasant School District is $580. For 6 weeks for Mount Pleasant School District is $480. Then scholarship rate for Mount Pleasant School District is $200. Scholarship rate non-Mount Pleasant School District is $250. Those numbers we're proposing at this point to jump not significantly, but to $600, $500, $300, and $250. So it would be $600 for non-Mount Pleasant School District, $500 for Mount Pleasant School, and then half of that for scholarship rate. So essentially, it's not much for the overall rate, and then $50 for the scholarship rate.
Okay. If I can get a little background, I left my packet at home, unfortunately, but if I'm not mistaken, it was either the elementary school or the middle school before the recent the proposed rate increases. One set was of it seemed to be a lot cheaper for it was cheaper for middle schoolers, or it was cheaper for.
It used to be cheaper for middle schoolers. We changed that so that it's across the board. I'm not sure why that was.
Okay.
So we just changed the rates to match.
Gotcha.
So that all the day camp. For the middle school, if we get the same numbers we did this year, we won't run it next year because it was only 5 students.
Okay. Gotcha.
So we would try to find another way to.
Wasn't there some kind of rate with somebody had IEP too?
Not from what I have.
I thought it was free if there's a student with an IEP.
Is it through the school district? Because the school district sponsored a bunch of kids.
Oh, okay.
They sponsored 100 kids.
Oh, okay, that might be.
Gotcha. But
So
I'd like to second what Commissioner Chapman was talking about. Like, I do think this is a priority, and I do think it's important to offer this as a low-cost option as much as we can. So we may need to raise fees. I'm going which is understandable, but like if we can slow that or keep it at a reduced rate, I do think that it should be an important priority for us. I think ultimately, like, we want to look for new sources of funding. I know that like streets are is going to be facing shortages, and like the entire general fund is predicted to be running at a deficit here soon if we're not like per your state.
I would say our work in the general fund over the past couple of years puts us to be non-deficit within the next 10 years at least. But again, also understanding it. And that's why I teed up the conversation by talking about streets, by talking about recreation. You just got cost increases that are going up everywhere.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just to lay out a foundation that it's where do certain things fall in terms of priority, and understanding that this is a program that would need significant annual funding going into the future if nothing else pans out.
And from what I understand, from my interpretation of what I was reading, it costs about $800,000 each year to run it. We get about $300,000 roughly from fees and the $500,000 from the federal grant. That was my understanding. So again, like, I think it'd be worth it to, like, again, seeking outside sources of funding. Obviously, again, I think we could have a good conversation with Union Township, other municipalities who fall into who their residents receive these services. I think that'd be something that they might be able to take a serious look at pitching into. I think, but going back again, if we can decrease the amount we have to take from the general fund, like, again, we have $1 million right now or not the general fund, but in the budget for this from the grant. If we can spread that over longer time, then that means we can still take from the general fund to pay this, but we're taking less each year than we would otherwise for however long we can stretch out $1 million to last. But yes, I think this is a priority. I would support ultimately pulling funds from the general fund.
And for me, I'm not suggesting we just do it. I'm saying if that's really the need of a community, we've created this program that we're saying it's something that we really see a huge need in our community, then I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't support it. I understand that everybody's grabbing for money for the budget. I get that. But at the end of the day, we prioritize, we're spending $30 million on water treatment facility, right? Because that's a huge priority. So if this is a priority, then make it a priority. If it's not, then like Maureen said, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money, you know? It really depends where we put in the priority of the needs of the community.
I agree. I don't think that anybody is suggesting that it's not a priority. I think the issue is, being able to sustain it in light of the current economic situation, in light of the kind of funding we have, in light of all the projects that are coming up that we have to take care of in order to sustain the community also, and to make sure that we're okay. So, and if we want to sustain it at this level, I do think that it is also not, I don't want to use this particular word, but it's not, advisable not to look for other sources of funding and to just simply say, let's rely on what comes in from the city. I don't know that that's sustainable either. So yes, we can budget and say, let's take this money, from the city for this part of length of time, just in case something happens in 2024, 25, or 26, let's set aside that. But I would also advise that we start looking for other sources of funding and partnerships to, help us, because otherwise it is problematic. That's my take. I want to be supportive, but I want to also say, hey, we can't just simply sit down there with our hands, sit on our hands and not say, look for other sources.
So it sounds like the commission is pretty much in agreement that this is an important program and that we would like to continue funding it, but we have to look for other sources of funding. And we may, raising the fees may be one of those sources. Would everyone agree with that? But we also should be looking outside.
Yes.
And looking for other partners.
Please, yes.
I think it's important that we also respectfully maybe educate our community as to the value of this program and the uniqueness of this program. I mean, it's kind of adjacent to some of our goals to make Mount Pleasant a cool place. We want, young professionals to stay in Mount Pleasant. If we want graduate students having children at CMU to stay in Mount Pleasant, they need to see that there's a vibrant city program that supports them having recreation and care for their students. And I think that, this perception of it being like a low-cost type option, just a convenient school thing, I mean, let's be proud of it. And I think making it a priority and it helps show our pride in it.
I agree. Well said.
So if I can, I know the city commission, it sounds like, again, as the mayor had said, priority program and important to us. I think looking at grants is something that we always do and will continue to do throughout administration of this program. But one thing I would like to see if the city commission is in agreement on, at least maybe by a sign of head nods, et cetera, is to maybe approach some of our partners for increased support of this program. We could utilize registrations, identify where our participants are coming from, and then have conversations that's within the school district, that's within other entities of government, townships, et cetera, and just talk to them about potentially supporting the program. So I see head nods on that.
Yes.
That'd be good. Excellent.
Thank you. You're off the hook now.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
And so if I can, that was really the conversation that we wanted to have tonight, tee up some of those issues of concern. Again, more conversations to be had on that. Just a reminder, as Director Saladin had pointed out, our next work session on this topic will be on October 23rd. We'll be addressing city commissioner questions at that time. So if you happen to have questions, I'm hoping you might be able to get those questions to me by October 9th. That allows me to vet them internally, get adequate answers, have them prepared, and have them part of the packet for the work session on the 23rd. We also have a public hearing scheduled for November 13th, and the deadline for the adoption of the budget is by the last meeting of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move out of work session. I am going to ask for a motion to consider a closed session.
I'll move to enter a closed session pursuant of subsection 8H of the Open Meetings Act to consider material exempt from discussion or disclosure by state or federal statute.
Is there a support?
I will second.
Okay. Do I need a roll call for this?
Commissioner Wingard,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapman,
Yes.
Commissioner Bush,
Yes.
Commissioner Ake,
Yes.
Commissioner Asman,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Alsager,
Yes.
Mayor Perschbacher.
Yes.
Motion carries.
May we have a 5-minute break?
Yes, we will take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.